Welcome to Franklin Covey's C-Suite Conversations. My name is Patrick Ledden, and each week I have the opportunity to sit down and talk to a senior executive about their career, what they've learned, what they've struggled with, how they've overcome those struggles, and along the way, some advice that they can share with you to help you have a more successful career, regardless of whatever role you're in, whether you're starting out or you're in the C-Suite yourself. Today, I'm joined by Daniel Domenech. Dan has been with Hewlett Packard Enterprise for a number of years and currently sits in the role of Chief Talent Officer. In our conversation today, we're going to talk about his career, the different roles he's taken on, and the different organizations and industries he's worked in. And we're going to weave that together into a conversation that's going to help you see the importance of continually learning, the importance of mentorship, and the importance of understanding that things are constantly changing and you need to stay individually and organizationally at the forefront. You're going to want to grab something right with, sit back, prepare to take some notes as Dan and I get together to have a C-Suite conversation. Dan Domenech, thank you so much for joining me today in C-Suite Conversations.
It's great to be here, Patrick. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. Thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it. We were chatting a little bit before we got started, and I said on the front end, I'm going to ask you this question, so I'll go ahead and just get it out there. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. Well, I love that question, Patrick. And actually, one of the things at Hewlett Packard Enterprise that we talk about are people's personal identity statements, right? From a DEI perspective, we want people to bring their whole selves to work. And sometimes people say it but don't mean it, but we really do mean it. And so for me, I'm always proud when I talk about my identity statement at HPE to say that I'm a Christian male, married 30 years to my wife, Nikki. I do let people know we were married at 12 years old, obviously. Uh, I talk about having 5 children, 4 boys and a girl, 3 of which who are adopted. My oldest from Peru and my youngest 2 from Guatemala. And I am a huge New York Mets and New York Jets fan, having been born in Queens, New York. I could see the old Shea Stadium from the end of my block that I grew up on. And as you probably know, Patrick, if you're a sports fan, the Mets have been on a magical run this year. They just evened up this series with the Los Angeles Dodgers, and so that's been pretty fun. Jets not doing as well, but we'll leave that where it is.
Well, people, as they're listening to this right now, they might be like, wait a minute, I know what happened to the Mets this season because this will air in a few weeks. Don't feel like you can run out and place a bet, folks. This is recorded a little bit early. You don't have insider information and how this all resolves, but I hope it resolves really well for you and your team.
Thank you,
folks that I follow are already out. I'm happy to go see you guys do really, really well. You know, as you were talking about that and saying that a lot of people, you know, they say it, but they don't mean it. When you said, like, tell me a bit about yourself and revealing yourself, what does that look like in your world? Because there may be some people listening right now going, you know, are we really living a desire to be more inclusive and create more belonging? What do you hear? What do you see that suggests somebody says it, but they don't always mean it?
Well, you know, you're reminding me, Patrick, of a recent Google study, right, that looked at the characteristics of the highest performing teams now, right? And maybe somewhat shockingly to some of our viewers, the number one characteristic now is psychological safety, right? And I think perhaps organizations or companies that say it but don't mean it are ones where they really don't necessarily want you to bring your whole self to work, and you know, a particular background or style is one where, you know, people are asked to maybe compromise and fit into whatever the cultural norm may be. And so, you know, in particular, you and I, before we started, were talking a little bit about the Hispanic Technical Executive Council, HITECH, that came to Hewlett Packard Enterprise a few weeks ago. You know, in that conference, we talked about how sometimes, you know, being of Hispanic or Latino heritage is not always as welcome as we'd like, you know, and people don't feel comfortable being themselves. So certainly at Hewlett Packard Enterprise, we absolutely encourage people to do that, to bring their whole selves to work.
What have you found? I'll ask you in 2 ways, Dan. First of all, kind of more institutional that helps create that greater sense where people can be their full selves. And then also just at an individual leader level, if you had a team. So maybe institutionally, what have you learned about some ways that you can kind of support that? And then we'll go into kind of individually as a leader, what can I do, even if my organization isn't helping people feel as welcome as we'd like?
Well, at Hewlett Packard Enterprise, Antonio Neri very recently on C-SPAN mentioned that we're not backing down, right, from our diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, although there's been some, pushback. And so having that accountability and leadership at the top is so critical. And then, when we talk about holding our senior leaders accountable, they have their management by objectives, their MBOs. And part of that, right, is having unconditional inclusivity, right? It's part of how we assess our leaders, every quarter. So that kind of systemic reinforcement of the importance of DEI and allowing people to bring their whole selves to work is so critical for us. And then when you talk about individual leaders, Patrick, it's building that skill, right, and capability with our leaders. Obviously, clarifying our culture and our values and how it's important that we're unconditionally inclusive. And then, giving leaders the tools to listen, right, to be empathetic, to understand that 98 or 99% of our thought is unconscious, right? So how do we recognize we all have unconscious bias? What might those be, and how do we mitigate and address them so that we don't have microaggressions, et cetera, in the workplace? So that's a little bit of how we try to attack
Yeah,
it.
that self-awareness piece does go a long way, doesn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely, really important and something we all got to work on.
Well, right now in your role right now as chief talent officer, you didn't just wake up one day and show up there. You've had quite a career getting from where you were in the past to where you are now. Would you tell us a little bit about your journey and maybe the places you worked and
Yeah,
maybe even some things you learned along the way?
yeah. Well, thank you. It kind of started back in high school. Not to bore you, Patrick, but I remember my dad sitting me down and saying, "Dan, what do you want to do with your life?" Right? And at the time, I thought maybe I wanted to be in business. He said, "Well, do you want to sell chemicals like your grandfather?" I said, "Well, maybe. I don't know." But my dad was really fixated on me being a doctor or a lawyer. He had wanted to be one himself and wanted me to be one, and those are tremendous professions. But I knew I wanted to pursue a career in business, and more specifically, as I ended up taking classes at Cornell University, I took some, at the time, what was called personnel management, but labor relations, HR management type courses, and I fell in love. Right, fell in love with the idea of being someone that could help understand a business's strategy and how they're trying to create competitive advantage, and then leverage people, right, the talent in an organization to try to achieve those objectives. So we ended up very fortunately being hired by General Electric onto their HR development program. Spent several years doing that until GE sold their aerospace business to Martin Marietta, which became Lockheed Martin, formidable defense and electronics company. So spent some time there. Ended up having, and I'm sure a significant focus of the conversation, Patrick, might be networks and mentoring, but I had a pretty significant mentor from there that went over to Allied Signal, and I followed that mentor there. This is where I had been through GE, learned a lot of the key skills in being an HR executive. I was a generalist in a new manufacturing facility, brand new facility, doing a lot of self-directed work team type of stuff. Moved on to do some college recruiting. Moved from there to do some labor relations with a significant union in New Jersey. So with that grounding, then started to move with Allied Signal into some more significant roles, things like leading HR for a smaller business unit, leading all of recruiting, talent acquisition for a division of what by then had become Honeywell. And so really enjoyed my time. And actually, as part of the Allied Signal Honeywell integration, it looked like GE was going to come along and I was going to become full circle, go back to GE. GE was acquiring Honeywell. And at that time, since I had already worked with GE, I decided to make my first industry change, right? So at this point, Patrick, I had about 10 years in industrial manufacturing. So I moved over to healthcare. I joined Bristol Myers Squibb, and I joined not only a new industry, but my first international role. I had been primarily in US based roles. I now had a chance to lead HR for Latin America and Canada. The role expanded to include Europe, Middle East, and South Africa. And so really loved my time at Bristol Myers Squibb doing that. Also got a chance to lead talent acquisition now for the company. So that was kind of my first center of excellence role at a company level. And then later on there, led HR for what was their technical operations or manufacturing organization. Spent some time at Johnson and Johnson, another tremendous company, before starting to work in another industry, and that's financial services. I was with American Express, and by this point, I had the chance to work for some pretty big organizations, but none quite as big as when I had a chance to lead HR for the credit card business, a $10 billion volume organization in American Express. Also got a chance to work with their global business services group and their global credit administration group. So really appreciated my time at American Express. And then I had a chance, Patrick, to move into technology with Dun and Bradstreet, right, the world's largest provider of company information and insights. So, spent some time at Dun and Bradstreet, and by this point, I was now leading all the global HR business partners for Dun and Bradstreet, and really helping to drive some pretty cool culture work, some great M&A work that DMB was involved with. But then DMB went through a privatization process, and I ended up making my final company stop to Hewlett Packard Enterprise, where I am now. Starting, given my background, Patrick, by having the chance to lead HR for our financial services organization, which grew to a broader role supporting all service team members at HPE. Our services folks do an amazing job with actually installing a lot of our products and systems, whether hardware, networking, AI, hybrid cloud, right? These are the things that HPE does. So supporting those tremendous services team members, leading up to now my current role for the last 8 months or so as Chief Talent Officer for HPE. So hopefully I haven't put you or any of our viewers to sleep, Patrick,
No,
but again, it's been a blessed run for me, some great companies. I've learned so much from all of them and the people and the leaders I worked with in those places, and I try to leverage those learnings,
it's
along
like a
into
virtual who's who of organizations. I mean, you hit some of the I mean, there's people on here there's people that I will talk to in life that, maybe they, in a course of a 30-year career, will have more organizations that they worked at. They're moving around maybe more frequently, but not these names. I mean, as you look at organization, what's the value of working in a large organization, do you think, since you worked in so many of those?
Well, the opportunity to impact the world, right? I mean, um, Bristol Myers Squibb's, and I don't know if it's evolved since then, but their mission was to extend and enhance human life, right? At HPE, we advance the way people live and work. And so when you're with a company of that magnitude, everyone wants to find purpose, right? Everyone wants to have a positive contribution to society. So sometimes through a big company, you really can impact millions of lives potentially.
That's such a great point. There were a few things as you were going through, Dan. I'm like jotted them down in my notes. I'm just going to go back and circle back to a couple of things. So first one was you talked a bit about networking and mentoring. You said I probably would go back to it, and sure enough, here I am. But I'd love to just hear you kind of riff a little bit on the importance of your network as well as mentorship.
I had a mentor. So when I started in GE on their HR development program, I was very early in my career, very young, quite honestly. And, I had some aspirations for clearly progressing in the HR profession, but didn't have a real good feel for what that could look like. And I had a mentor at GE who saw things in me, Patrick, that I didn't see in myself. And he had aspirations for me and expectations for me. Things like being a director by a certain age or period of time. And we know everyone's career path is different, but having someone like that, his name was Rich, who sees more in you than maybe you even see in yourself and gives you confidence is so invaluable. And Rich, recently retired, and I embarrassed him in front of colleagues by saying exactly what I've told you. And so, we've talked about, including with high tech organization I mentioned a few minutes ago, how do we pull up, folks that maybe are underrepresented or don't have a voice or don't have the confidence in themselves. How do we identify them? How do we help them, give them that confidence? And I've seen, Patrick, and I know, right, Franklin Covey does amazing things with leadership. Some of our leadership programs have focused almost exclusively on identifying that talent and how do we build their confidence. And one of the programs where we did this, by the graduation of the program, we had phenomenal results, like 50% of the team members being in a lateral or a new role, many of which were promoted, saying, with this program, you gave me the confidence to go for that job or to better market and sell myself, right? So, so Rich played such a critical role to me. And, over time, as I've tried to work on my brand and, how my effectiveness as a professional, I've sought different mentors. I've sought different networks and opportunities like this to talk to people like yourself, Patrick, about my career and my learnings and how I can keep learning. Learning agility is such a huge thing at Hewlett Packard Enterprise. I know many of the organizations that are listening in, and I try to be that way. Even though I won't tell you how old I am, I am every day trying to learn, be externally focused, not just internally focused at the company, and see how I can get better.
Yesterday, I was telling the guys before we started recording this that yesterday I was up in Detroit and I was speaking to an audience, and just coincidentally, what I was talking to them about, one of the things I was talking about to them about is the story, your story, and how as a leader we're in a unique position oftentimes to help enhance or improve or help someone in the process of as they write their story. And sometimes in our stories we have these big days where we write a few sentences that like this is something big that happened in my life. But a lot of times it's dotting the I, crossing the T every day. We're just kind of letting our story unfold. And as I was talking to them about it, I asked them to think about somebody in their life who's had a positive impact on them, and it could have been a coach or a teacher or whomever it might be. And what did that person do? How did it affect your story, type of thing? So like a Rich type of conversation, right? And it's amazing when I ask that to an audience and ask for a few volunteers. First of all, this is one of those exercises where people do not hesitate to share an answer. There will be hands going up wanting to share. And oftentimes the examples they give are 2, 3, 4, 5 decades earlier, or even more than that. One time I was talking to an audience, I know there was a woman in the room who was in her 70s, and she shared about something in middle school. That type of thing. It's like that the long shadow, I guess, in a positive way, of that is cast by people like Rich who impact lives. So I would encourage everybody, just to kind of hold on to that story as you talked about Rich, and just think about how that impacts your lives. Now, in the
That's
last
right.
several years, I've been a professor at Vanderbilt University here in Nashville, Tennessee. And the last 2 years or so of it, I ran a project called the Disruption Project. And the Disruption Project was really studying all the disruptions we have in our life, the small, the big, and everything in between, and how those disruptions can move us closer to our purpose in life or further away from our purpose in life. And oftentimes it's a choice of how we handle those things. I'm just
Hmm.
curious, when you said you went from one industry to another, so you spent, you say 10 or 11 years in one industry, and then you made your first industry jump. What prompted you? Was there a disruption that you decided, okay, I'm going to move in a new direction because I see opportunity? Was it something in your own mind when you were going to bed at night saying, I need to disrupt myself? What caused you to make that move? Because that's a bold move.
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I loved my time in industrial manufacturing. Sometimes it was ready, fire, aim, right? It was really fast paced, high performance organizations, gave me the high standard I think I have even to this day, right, around talent and high performance in an organization. But I did want to see a different industry. And I was attracted, Patrick, to the healthcare industry where, we could impact people's lives in a different way. So that was what was exciting about it. I think it was a huge culture shift, right? Because in many of the healthcare industry, organizations, there is more risk aversion, right? Because you're in some cases putting product in
Yeah.
people's bodies. In the financial industry, I saw that as well. And so sometimes, if you think about it, it can take 10 to 15 years to discover, develop, make, market, sell a drug. It felt, Patrick, sometimes like in that industry, it took that long to make decisions. I think maybe some of the folks listening are saying, yes, Dan, I know exactly what you're talking about. But I had to shift, right? My mindset and my approach, coming from this kind of, very fast paced, performance oriented culture to one that was a little bit more careful, like measured, right? Collaborative in some cases. So I think that's what's interesting, and maybe others have similar experiences that different industries can bring different cultures and approaches, and you need to situational leadership, right?
Yeah.
You need to adapt to that and
Yeah,
be
yeah.
agile.
As you're
Yeah.
saying that, I'm thinking like a couple of industries you mentioned, like financial services, or pharmaceutical, highly regulated. Right, a lot of process, a lot of system, a lot of structure, as opposed to other entities. It could be a little bit more fast paced. Can do a little bit more of the, would you say? Would you say ready, fire, shoot, aim? What was the expression?
Yeah, that's ready. Ready,
I,
ready, fire,
ready,
aim.
ready,
Right,
fire,
exactly.
aim. There you go. Yeah. So it's interesting though, because there's the component of like you are learning how to operate in a new culture, or every organization has a culture, and then industries obviously have impact on those cultures as well. If they're not operating completely independently, these organizations operate within an industry where there's some norms. But in your role these days, and especially like when you were talking about Dun and Bradstreet and some of the shifts that were going on there, what you're doing right now, I mean, I would imagine that you've played a role not just personally trying to make sure that you adjust yourself and understand the culture yourself that you're working in as an individual contributor, but nowadays you're actually doing business transformation and leading things that have significant impact on culture. So put that hat on for a
Right.
moment. Just like, what have you learned about when you're trying to go through a transformation or a major change in an organization, how you keep your finger on the pulse of that culture?
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, I think first of all, it's so important that you set expectations around what your culture is, right? What are your cultural beliefs? What are the values of the company? How do you expect people to behave, either as a leader or as an individual contributor? So that's, first. And then, how do we, again, give feedback, train, develop our team members to live into that culture? And then how do we measure, right? How do we gather feedback from from team members? How do we survey? How do we talk with them about it? Understand where we're strong, where we have gaps, and the actions we can take to address the gaps in our culture. So that's something that all the companies I've mentioned I've done, and I think HPE does an exceptionally good job at that. I've seen employee engagement rates higher than anywhere else I've been to this point in my career. And it takes, starting with Antonio Neri and the executive committee and every leader, in the company, it takes all of that effort to drive a culture. And that's why we're so proud that we've been nominated by Fortune and others as one of the top companies to work for, including in the tech space.
When we talk about the role of every leader, you said as far as reinforcing, building, modeling within that culture. And then you talk about psychological safety earlier. We discussed, we talked about a little bit about diversity and inclusion and changes in the workplace in that regard. There's a lot moving along. If I'm a future leader, like what are a couple of things I need to really make sure I understand are essential to being successful?
It's a great question, Patrick. And there's a couple of things that come to mind. One of the things that we've been talking about recently as a company is, there was kind of a model of leadership that said, earlier in your career, you're going to be maybe more operationally or execution focused. Later, you're going to be more strategic, more visionary, more future focused. I think we're finding that the balance of doing both is critical at all levels in the organization, from being a new leader through being a CEO, right? And so, finding that balance, I think, is critical. We also talked about the psychological safety components, right? How, as a leader, are you helping your team to feel heard, giving them space to be themselves, creating a relationship where there's give and take, and you're helping the team member to understand where they can improve, but where they can build on their strengths. So, I think that is what we're seeing in terms of the evolution of what leaders need to be cognizant of. And part of that's empathy, right? Through COVID, I think we certainly heard that leaders need to be much stronger in being empathetic around what their team members are going through and giving the space for that discussion versus just jumping into the professional components. Patrick, one of the things that I do in every staff meeting is we do a personal and professional check-in, right? We start, and you can start with either one, but maybe personally, what's going on in your life that you're willing to share that could be impacting, how you're showing up at work, and then of course professionally, what's going on. And when I took on this new role, I spent the first hour with my new team doing this. They were very vulnerable right off the bat in sharing. And by the end of the session, team members were telling me, you know what, Dan, as a result of us doing that, as a team, I felt more willing to share not only what was going well in the talent COE, but what we could be doing better because we were starting to build that intimacy as a team right off the bat. Relational mindsets is one way that I've heard it described, that approach. So hopefully that makes
No,
sense.
it does make sense. And I was just thinking as you were talking about this, I was in a discussion with some colleagues the other day, and we were discussing how the pendulum sometimes swings. And historically, it seems to have swung from the leadership perspective to, hyper emphasis on performance or a hyper emphasis on people. And what I hear you describe there is kind of a third alternative where there's the people component is obviously very critical, but also at the end of the day, we're working together to deliver something. So it's the ability to recognize both of those things, and as a leader to kind of know where you need to be at any given moment.
Absolutely. Yep. That's being agile as a leader and understanding, what needs to be addressed at any given moment, personally or professionally, for
And
sure.
when you think about the dynamic nature of business and some of the things we're talking about today, that quite frankly, if we were talking 15 years ago, some of these words wouldn't have come out of our mouths. So as we're talking about them
That's
today,
right.
how does that change your approach to talent acquisition and development and retention? What are you thinking about those things these days?
Yeah, it's a great point. From a talent acquisition standpoint, we know there's continuing to be a war for talent, right? So we kind of start with ensuring we have that absolutely strong culture, but also that people are clear, on what our mission is. Again, at HPE, advancing the way people live and work through our excellence, whether it's in the AI space in our recent partnership with NVIDIA, networking, where we've announced our pending acquisition of Juniper and plan to be a networking powerhouse, the hybrid cloud offerings and financial services offerings we provide. So, helping shape, potential candidates' understanding of what is it they're getting into, both in terms of how the company helps the world and impacts the world, and what it would be like to work there from a culture standpoint. And you do see that, right, Patrick? I mean, obviously, people want to go somewhere where they can contribute, have purpose, and grow. And they want to enjoy the people they work with, the culture they're a part of, and that's part of the magic for us. So that's a big piece of the talent acquisition and retention play that we have. From a development standpoint, so much today, Patrick, right around personalization, right? Understanding our personas, meeting people where they are, helping them to learn in the flow of work, right?
Right.
Utilizing AI, right, to help us with that personalization. So that's a big part of what my team and I are working on today. And, starting right from individual contributors, new people in the company, helping them to understand, do they even want to be a leader, right? I mean, it's okay to just be an individual contributor. But if you want to be a leader, what does it look like to lead at HPE? And how do we start building those skills early? Right. And then helping them, and what does it look like to develop as a manager or director or VP, or in the C suite? And each of those experiences are different, and it's got to be an experience, right? Development, I would argue, Patrick, can't just be a class, right, or a webinar, or a training program. It needs to be an experience. So that's the stuff we're thinking about and working on as we speak.
I was talking to an executive one time of Netflix, and they were talking about how at this point in time when we discussed it, that Netflix had a few iterations of itself, right? So some people might remember that they would mail you CDs, and then you might remember you got a queue, and you could actually download things and stream them that way. Now it's obviously an open platform.
That's
Then they
right.
got into content, so there was all these different kind of evolutions, and they were talking about like it's kind of the discussion about what got you here won't get you there type of thing. As in, then how do you bring your talent along through that process? Because some people can make that transition from one business model to the next. And then also, how do you gracefully and appropriately and respectfully deal with somebody that maybe they were shipping CDs, like putting them in the mailbox and shipping them out, and maybe they're not going to be great down the road for content development. I'm not saying they would or wouldn't be, but I'm just saying, like, thinking that through and recognizing that there's a person behind all of those decisions.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you're reminding me of the importance of upskilling and reskilling, right?
Yeah.
As we've gone through our transformations, I think we've tried to be very authentic, right, and transparent with our team members around, here's what we're good at as a company today. Here are the skills we have, and over time, we're shifting our strategy, right? We're going to become, a powerhouse in these areas, and I alluded to them earlier. So these are the kinds of skills and capabilities required to execute on that strategy. And this is how we need you to be learning agile and to think about how you can be increasing your skills in these areas. As a matter of fact, Antonio Neri mentioned recently to all team members that you need to have a minor in AI, right? Everyone needs to have a minor in AI. And we've recently rolled out a development program to give people some of that baseline understanding of AI and how to use it responsibly and what it might look like in the company and for our customers. So, again, helping team members to think about that shift that needs to happen for them every day is part of what we're doing.
I think that's so smart. I mean, the ability to say, as a senior leader, like, here's where we're going and here's what's needed, but also to extend that it's an offer at that point to say, but you have to make a step toward this too, right? Individual contributors, the leaders of those teams, they need to make the move toward it because the organization can't do it all for you. But the organization can say, here's where we're going. This is the next mountain we're going to climb. And we need these type of hiking skills when we get there. And we're going to help you provide some opportunities for you to get there. But ultimately, you have to make a decision yourself individually. And we need to make the vision compelling enough that you're willing to take that journey with us.
I love it, Patrick. I think back to my early days at GE. Jack Welch, I think, wrote a book that said, manage your own career or someone else will, right? And we do, ask our team members to own their careers, and for sure, their leader and their coaches and mentors and the company will support you. We have quarterly discussions with all our team members around how are they doing against their bold goals, how are they doing in terms of their living the HPE values or the leadership attributes. How are they being unconditionally inclusive, and giving them feedback on how that's going, as well as discussing their career aspirations and how we're helping them develop. But you've got to take, as a team member, that ownership yourself with us as a company. So yeah, you're right on there, Patrick.
So as we wrap up our conversation, again, Dan, thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. I know the audience has learned a ton from you. As we wrap it up, what's one piece of advice that you would give to listeners, kind of regardless of where they are in their journey, early on or further along in their journey, if you will? What would you share with them about kind of progressing toward the next step in their career?
Yeah. Well, it starts with our values, right? As individuals. I mean, obviously, I talked about company values, but I talked a little bit about my identity statement. So whether it's my faith, my family, how I try to show up as a leader every day at HPE, be true to your values and, be authentic and transparent. That's worked for me. That's part of what I aspire to in terms of my personal brand. But be learning agile, right? Have a growth mindset. Always be learning and getting better and growing and developing in whatever it is that you're doing. But there is an element of needing to bring passion, energy, and execution, right, to whatever you're doing. Because if you don't apply that, it's going to be tough to succeed in whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. So, those are some of the parting thoughts that come to mind.
I appreciate that. And actually, as you were going through those parting thoughts, I was recognizing several of those things actually showing up in the conversation today. So the fact that you were learning and growing and developing all along. We talked about moving from industry to industry, but each of those businesses you were operating in was, new offerings, new strategies, and you were staying, you were adapting to those things in so many great ways. So I thought that was really interesting, Dan, because you kept bringing that in. And then the piece around your values and being true to who you are, that was from the very beginning. So I really appreciate you doing this today, sharing with our listeners. And I just wish you all the best. And I guess we'll find out how the Mets do.
That's right. We'll see how they do. No matter what, they've had a magical run. But yeah,
There you
thanks.
go. There you go. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Patrick. Appreciate it.
Well, folks, that's all I have for today's episode. Big thanks to Dan Domenech for joining me in C-Suite Conversations to talk about his life, his work, his career, what he's learned along the way, all with one thought in mind: to help you to have a more effective career, whether you're starting out now or you're already in the C-Suite. That's all I have for today. Thanks so much for joining me. My name is Dr. Patrick Ledden. Now go make it a great day.